We're going to talk about two sections of the software today. One is called Realtime. Here it's called Realtime Displays. And we're also going to be discussing what's called agent dashboards. Now, agent dashboards is what I discuss at the end or closer to the end. And that's strictly because not everybody has that specific module. And so if you don't have agent dashboards when we get to that point, please know that you are not obligated to stick around for that portion of the training. Of course, you're welcome to. I'm going to go through it. But if you don't have it and you don't want to stick around for that, then again, that's perfectly fine. I take no personal offense to that. Okay. So we're going to talk about those two main items today. We're going to go ahead and start with Realtime. Now, the first thing I like to mention here is I do have people occasionally ask, how do I know if I have Realtime? Because sometimes people jump into these sessions and they may not know exactly what they have. And that's perfectly fine. That happens fairly regularly. And so with that being the case, one way to tell really quickly if you have Realtime is if I open up Realtime Displays, I should see 4 items. I should see agent timeline, group timeline, real-time stats, and alerts and triggers. If you do not have Realtime, unfortunately, you will still see this Realtime Displays section, but there will only be one item in there. That's this alerts and triggers. And that's just because these alerts and triggers, while technically they are a real-time feature, there are certain triggers that you have access to, even if you don't have Realtime. And we call those our standard triggers. So those are going to be things like emergency call notifications. This can alert you to if someone in your office dials an emergency number. Okay, it can alert you to logging issues. If your software stops logging, it'll let you know. Same thing with disk space issues. If I run out of disk space, or if I'm about to run out of disk space, it sends me a message to let me know, hey, you're almost out of space. Okay, so those are some features that everyone has access to, whether they have Realtime or not. Okay, so that is why under that section you will have alerts and triggers, even if you don't have these other items. Most likely, I believe everybody on here today has these, so that really shouldn't be an issue. But I do get occasionally asked that. Okay. All right. Let's start with the most popular aspect of this. And also, I don't want to use the word complicated. Let's start with the more time-intensive and most important aspect of this, which is our real-time stats. Real-time stats is a fancy way of saying wallboards. Okay, and the nice thing about this is you can actually create as many wallboards as you want. There's no limit, right? So if I want to create 30 different wallboards, you can. I have seen companies that do that. Some companies just create one. They don't have a need for that many wallboards. They just have the one, right? So what we're seeing here is we are seeing some pre-built templates that we have and that you have access to. They might look a little different from yours. Again, if you're on Chronicall or if you're on a Call reporting, that would be the difference. But we can see here that this is a wallboard that shows what we call 2 groups. This is our 2 groups wallboard. It's fairly simple to see why, right? So we have our support team and our sales team. This gives me the ability to monitor 2 different groups simultaneously. Now these widgets up here are looking at the group in total, so the group collectively. However, when I have agents that have that real-time license assigned to them, or some of you might call it the contact center license, if I come down here, I can actually see individuals as well. So this gives me the ability, most of the time it's group totals, but I also have the option to create what we call these leaderboard widgets, and these leaderboard widgets allow me to see individuals. So I can see currently, what every agent is doing. That's what agent state shows me. I can see how many calls they've answered, how many they've missed, what their average talking duration is. These are called leaderboard widgets because it allows me to see who the leaders are for specific things. Right now, what this is looking at is it's looking at who has answered the least amount of calls. Okay. If I click on this header here, it moves the leader to the top. So right now, Jared Baker has the most calls answered. Right now, we don't really have a close second place. But down here, we have Courtney Adams and Brandon Carpenter, who are tied with 14 calls answered. If, by chance, Brandon answers a 15th call before Courtney, he does move up the list. So these are active, right? Obviously, all widgets are active, but these ones will move the agent up and down that list based upon where they fall in that leader column. Okay. Now, once I've built a wallboard, once this is ready to go, one of the other things that you can do is you can come up here, and I'll save this really quickly here. Up here in the top right-hand corner, what we typically see a lot of our clients do is they will go find like a big screen TV or projector or something like that, and they will connect a computer to that TV or projector with an HDMI cord. At that point, they can come up here and hit this, diagonal arrow pointing to the top right. Hopefully your GoToMeeting box isn't covering that. you can minimize that GoToMeeting box if it is in the way. But if I click on this arrow up here in the top right-hand corner, that then takes that wallboard and puts it up full screen for me. Now, the really nice thing about this is I mentioned earlier, you can actually create as many wallboards as you want. There's no limit to how many you can create. And because I can create multiple, what I can actually do is I can actually set this up on a loop so that where it loops every 10 seconds or 30 seconds, a minute, whatever you want. So you can decide if you want it to loop or not. A loop just means that it switches between wallboards. That's it. Okay, so if I have multiple wallboards that I want to have displayed out throughout the day, in fact, by default, they will switch every 10 seconds if I put it up full screen. Okay, so I would have to turn that off if I don't want it to. Or if I want to expand that time or extend that time, I can. Okay, so that is kind of nice that I have the ability to do that. To exit out of this, I just hit escape, and that takes me out of it, and there we go. Now, I will mention really quickly up here, there's this pencil tool. This is what we call the parameters for the wallboard itself. If I open this up, this allows me to do a couple things. One of those things is add a background. As you can see that there is a background in this one. We call it wood JPG. Looks like wood in the background there. So we can see the background, and then from there we can also do things like this, right here where it says full screen loop duration. Like I mentioned, it is default set at 10 seconds, but I can extend that. So maybe I want it to be a minute, right? So then I would just put that at 60 seconds. Or maybe I want it to be 2 minutes, 120 seconds, whatever you want to do. Okay. Or if I don't want it to loop at all, I just put it at 0 and put apply. And then at that point, it will not loop at all. Okay. So that's just an example. We're going to create a couple of these really quickly before we move on, though. Are there any questions so far? Okay. Great. Awesome. Now, once I've got my wallboard, oh, yes, Fam, you have a question. Go for it. Or I'll wait till you type it out, I guess.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, there you go. Perfect.
Okay, all right. Oh, I'm trying to type it in, but I don't want to type it in. It might take too long. But
You're good.
is there a way to on the wallboard? Is there a way to basically? I know you can create as many wallboards you want.
Mhm.
If there's a certain amount of calls, like say if it hits a threshold to where there's 10, 15 call and we want to make a wallboard that says, hey, all hands on deck.
Yeah.
Can it trigger that and
Yeah.
then go back?
Well, okay, so not with a wallboard, no. What you could do is you have the option to create what we refer to as a real-time alert and trigger. And essentially what this does, and I'll kind of just show you, this isn't the exact same thing, but I'll kind of show you the gist of it. What would happen is if that threshold is hit, let's say, for example, I wanted to know if we had 15 calls in queue. Now, there's a couple ways we can do that. The first, I'll actually show you this really quickly here. The first is I can create a threshold here. And what that basically means is I could have this change a specific color. So let's say if we've got 9 calls in queue right now. Let's say I put that at 5 for my first threshold and 10 for my second threshold. And I'd have those colors change. So what I can actually do is have that color change. But in addition to that, I can actually set up an alarm to go off with that as well. We've got these little musical notes you can click on, and these are preloaded, so you can choose whichever one you would want to use. Okay, so that's one option, and it starts playing on my side. You guys probably didn't hear that, but anyway, I could do that. The other option that you have is like I said, you could create what we call a real-time trigger, and let's say, for example, I wanted to create one for calls in queue. What I can actually do is create it so that when we hit that threshold, what would happen is a screen pop similar to this would pop up on the agent's screen and let them know, hey, you've got 15 calls in queue, right? Something like that. So you could do it that way. It can also be sent as an email or a text message, but unfortunately, it doesn't. There's not like a way for us to pull up a separate wallboard that says calls in queue or something like that. It would just be directly to the agents, like using something like this, or or it would be like I said on the wallboard we have it as it is right now. It would turn color and it would sound off that alarm if you wanted to.
Oh, okay. I would thought that we have them on the board. It could do that once it triggers the threshold. So, but that's fine.
Yeah. Sorry, it's a great feature request. I believe you mentioned some of those things yesterday as well that I can send over to our product team. So, yeah, it's a great question. But unfortunately, those are the only ways right now that we can alert agents that there is an issue. So
okay, all right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. No problem. Any additional questions? Okay, cool. Great. Well, let's go ahead then. I'm going to go ahead and just save that one, even though I made that change. I don't really need it, but I'll make that change for now. Let's talk about actually building some wall boards. And there's really kind of two ways that you can approach this. What we've already seen is what we call our pre-built templates. And this is where there is a slight difference between Avaya call reporting and Chronicall, and depending on your version. Chronicall sometimes has more options than Avaya call reporting does. Okay. And that's just strictly because we have options in here in this one that like people don't really ever use. And so Avaya call reporting being newer has some of them removed just because they were never used. Okay. And so there, you might see some here that I have that you don't. But I'll talk about some that you will have. Here's that two groups option that I just showed you just a second ago. So that's that's one of the options. These are typically themed in some way, right? So we have two groups. We have inbound call center. This one's for outbound call center. We have blended call center where it's both, right? So you have these different options that you can choose from when building the wall boards. So that is what we always recommend. And that's honestly typically what people do is they use these pre-built templates. If you're adventurous, you can build your own. And that's what this blank option is. Okay, we'll get to that one in just a minute. Let's talk about how to use one of these pre-built templates, and then we'll move on to showing you how to build your own. So if I wanted to use one of these, I would just need to decide which one I wanted to use. Let's do this inbound call center option, inbound wall board option right here. And then from there, all I have to do is hit use template. And at that point, it will pull up a few questions for me, and this will be dependent on the specific wallboard that I choose to use or the template that I choose to use. Some of them will have more questions. Some of them might even just have one, right? It kind of just depends. But these are the questions that I have to answer. These are the parameters that I have to answer in order to build this wallboard. Now, the purpose of this, we're going to see two things here, groups and agents. And these are referring to these widgets that you see here. Now, obviously, these all look the same. Why are they all listed out like that? Well, if you notice here, and over here to the right. As I hover over those widgets, it actually shows me where it's located and what value that represents. Right, so this will show you what that value is. The nice thing about this is once I do finish this wallboard, if there's something here I don't like, I can change it. Right, these templates, while they're built for you, they're not set in stone. So you can make any changes to them that you would like to make. Okay, so as I hover over it, it shows you where it is and what it is. This is one of those leaderboard widgets. And this is going to be looking at my agents, my real-time agents. And so it's not going to list out each value that's on that wallboard or on that widget currently, but it will show you, hey, this is one of those leaderboard widgets, and it shows me where it is. So as we've kind of seen those, great. Let's go through now and say, okay, well, which group would I want these widgets to represent? So I'll start here, just click in here, and you can select your group. Now, when I say group, that's referring to your phone system group, or some of you that are using our contact center, those are your skills groups. Okay. So I can come in here and select the skill or the group that I want to choose, or that I want this to monitor. And then this is the one for agents. So I'm going to go ahead and select which of my real-time agents I want featured here. Here's the nice thing about this. When I'm selecting agents, it actually will only present to me my real-time agents. So I don't have to worry about trying to remember. Maybe I have, maybe Chronicall or Avaya call reporting has 100 agents listed in there, but only 10 of them have that real-time license assigned to them. I don't want to have to try to go through that list and try to remember who has it, who doesn't. Now, you probably have a really pretty good idea, but at this point, what I would do is I would just say, okay, here are my real-time agents, and I, of course, can select individuals if I want to, whatever. I typically will just say select all, because I want to see all my real-time agents. Most likely, they belong to the same group. Okay, but if not, of course, like I said, you can go one by one and select each individual agent if that's what you'd like to do. Hit OK, and that's it. I hit OK again, and upon hitting OK, what will happen is the software will now go through and build that wallboard for me. So I don't have to take the time to do that from the ground up. It's already built. It's got the values in place. Now all I have to do is go through and select which group and which agents I want these to monitor, and I've got my wallboard built for me. Now, like I said, if there's something here I don't like, maybe I don't care about how many agents are currently in that do not disturb state. That's fine. Change it. So I can make any changes to this that I want. Now I'll show you how to build widgets in just a second. But just know that if there's something here that you don't like, that is okay. You can make the changes to reflect what it is you want it to show. Okay? So that is the first way I build a wallboard. I use a pre-built template. And like I said, you can create as many of those as you want. If I want to create a new one, I just click on this little plus symbol, and that opens up a new wallboard. Okay? Any questions on using a pre-built template? Okay. All right. Let's do one that's a little bit more challenging. Let's build our own, right? Because we may have these widgets here or these wallboards here, and you might think, okay, I don't need all the bells and whistles. I just want a simple, basic wallboard that's going to show me a couple things, right? So do this how you want. I'll select blank and then again hit use template. The difference here is it's not going to ask me which groups are users, and that's just because there currently are no widgets. There's no metrics for it to measure at this point. It's brand new. So I've got this blank template here. Across the top, I've got these widgets that I can choose from. Right? So we've got a whole list of them. One thing I like to point out is in this list here, I also have an explanation of what each one of those widgets does. Okay, so if you're curious about a widget, you can see what it does here in this list. It tells you what it is and how it works. Okay, so across the top here, if I want to use a widget, all I have to do is select the widget that I want to use. Now, typically I can hover over it and it will show me what the name of it is. So I can see, okay, this is the title value widget. If I want to use this widget, all I have to do is select it, and then either just click on my screen or click and drag it to the size that I want it to be, something like that right there. Okay. Now, with this being the case, and by the way, fam, I might have just had an idea maybe of what you were referring to when it comes to the wallboard popping up to let them know. That might be in regards to what we call our contact center agent client, which is essentially an account that your agents are logging into that shows them, you know, if you have contact center, really is what I'm referring to here. So if you have contact center and an agent is logged into that, it does show a wallboard and it can pop up on that screen if there is calls in queue or something like that to a certain threshold. So I would recommend joining into my Friday training. We can explain that a little bit better. But that I just had that thought as I was kind of doing this here. So kind of side note, segue. All right. Okay, so with this here, I've got my widget in place. I get this properties window that opens up. The majority of these properties, honestly, are just aesthetic. It's the look of the widget. And honestly, I don't super care about that a lot, but you can, right? If you want to make changing it to it, you can, right? You can do whatever you want. You can change the border. You can put a color in the background. You can change the size of it with this. I typically just like to change the size by clicking and dragging. Okay, that's just me. Where you will live mostly in this is in these first 4 lines, title down through threshold. Okay, and really we're going to kind of exclude this decorate part. It's not super important. So value is really where this is going to make the most impact for you. Right here where it says click to define, if I open this up by clicking on this ellipsis, this is now going to present to me a window, and there are 4 folders in that window. There's counts, durations, miscellaneous, and formula. Counts are just that. It's a total of things. It's a count or how many, right? Duration is how long. Miscellaneous is kind of potpourri of those 2 things. It's actually, it has things that are here that are counts, some that are durations, and then there are some that don't even fit into those categories. And I'll explain one of those in particular a little bit later here. And then formula is for those of us that want to build our own formula. Maybe we like the values that are here, but maybe I want to do a percentage of values combined or something like that. You do have the option to create formulas. This is very similar to if you're creating a formula, if you have our custom reports module, and if you've been on my custom reports training, we talk a little bit about formulas here. It's the same thing. Okay, so you can do that here if you'd like. But before I actually select a value or anything, I do want to kind of put in one little nugget of information, and that is this. I would highly recommend, before you even get in here to build a wallboard, I would recommend opening up like a notepad text file or writing down on a piece of paper or putting on an Excel spreadsheet, something like that. What is it that I want to see on this wallboard? And the reason why is because if I map this out in regards to what it is I want to see, that makes this process much easier, right? So I might open this up and say, okay, well, what do I want to see? I want to see calls in queue now. And I want to see what the longest queue duration is. Longest queue duration now. I also want to see something like abandoned calls, or I want to see what agents are doing right now. Like, so there's all sorts of different things that we could list here, right? But I would recommend going through and making a list of those values that you want to see, because as I create those values or as I create the widgets, I can then mark these off and make sure that I'm following that process and following that order. Plus, more than anything, it just helps me to know what it is I'm looking for. Okay, so keep that in mind. You don't have to do that, obviously, but it is a nice way when I'm going through building a wallboard to kind of make that list. And the reason why is because, again, if I come back in here and I start looking at this thinking, okay, well, what's available for me? It's just a more time-consuming process. So think about what it is that you want to see first, have that plan, come in here, and then start building based upon that plan, or based upon that plan, excuse me. Okay. All right, so I'm going to start with the one I just said. I want to see how many calls are in queue right now. So how many is a count. So I'm going to stay in this count folder, and I'm going to look for calls in queue. This is alphabetical, so I can start by saying, okay, I want to see calls in queue. I'll notice here there's not an option for calls in queue. Well, let's just adjust that a little bit. Let's say queued calls. If I scroll down here, there is an option for queued calls. So I can select that, and by selecting it over here to the right-hand side, I get the parameters now for that specific metric. So it's going to start most of the time, depending on the widget that I'm using. Sometimes it starts with name or title. Most of the time it starts with time frame. Okay, and again, that's just going to be dependent on the widget that you're creating. So time frame. I'll open this up. It gives me 3 options. Okay, so keep in mind these real-time wallboards are for information for the day, right? So this isn't historical necessarily for last week or anything like that. This is looking at a real-time count of things. So it gives me 3 options. Starting with the bottom, we can say since a specific time. So let's say, for example, my agents start taking calls at 8 o'clock. So I could say since 8 a.m. Or I could say in the last X amount of time, maybe in the last 2 hours, right? Or last 30 minutes, whatever I want to do. So I could say last X amount of time, or I could say right now. In particular with queued calls, it's typically people wanting to see how many calls are in queue at this moment. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and say now because that's a live count of calls in queue. Great. There we go. Calculation. Calculation, I actually don't change very often, especially here in this count folder. I do a little bit more in duration, and I'll show you that in just a minute here, but here's kind of why. Calculation, depending on the value, doesn't really give me many options. Count, for queue calls here, it's count and true false. Count shows me the actual number of calls in queue. That's the one I most likely want to use. Whereas true false will show me true, you have calls in queue, false, you don't, right? Which isn't super crazy helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and say count, and then we'll go ahead and select which group if I want this to look at a specific group. Occasionally we have clients that are just like, I just want to see in general for my company how many calls are in queue. Now that would require agents within the groups to have the real-time license in order for me to see that. But, some companies do have multiple groups that have real-time licenses assigned to them. And so if that's the case, you can just go ahead and leave this blank and hit OK and move on. But if I have multiple groups that have queued calls or that have those real-time licenses, and I want to see, 1 or 2 combined or something like that, I will want to come in here and say, okay, look, I want to see marketing and customer service. How many calls do they have in queue combined? So you don't have to do that, but you can. Now there's 2 other options here, and this is really only going to play out for those of you that have the contact center module, or sometimes we call it multimedia. If you have contact center, in particular, if you are using our queue callback feature, that's where these last 2 items come into play. Queue event allows me to say, I want to have this queue count include calls that had one of these events that took place. So for example, maybe I want this to count in this count or in this total, calls that were in the queue that have a callback scheduled, or calls that have snoozed the callback, or calls that have missed the callback, whatever that might be, right? So you can use that. Typically, this is people who have the contact center module using the queue callback feature. Okay, so you can include calls in here that have included one of those queue events. Now you can also include in here pending queue callback calls. So if someone has selected to receive a callback, by default, it will automatically, quote unquote, remove them from the queue. They still have their place in queue, but it won't count them in here by default. If I want to include the people that are waiting for a callback, I can switch this to true, and that would include those people that are waiting for a callback. Okay, so that's only really going to be used if you're using the callback feature for the contact center. Right? Otherwise, I'll answer those 3 questions, hit OK, and then hit apply, and there we go. Okay, so currently between those 2 groups, oddly, I don't have any calls in queue. Okay, so there you have it. So that's how I create a widget. It is actually pretty simple. Now I'm going to create a couple more here, but any questions on this so far? Okay. All right, let's do another one here. Let's do another popular one. This is the gauge widget. I'll go ahead and select it. And again, either just click on the screen or click and drag out. I'm just going to click on the screen. I'll adjust the size in just a minute here. Here's the beauty of this. It's basically the same process from this point on. Value, click to define. Let's go ahead and do this time in that list of things I said I wanted to see. I already said I wanted to see how many calls are in queue right now. Now I want to know what's the longest queue duration at this point in time. Okay, now currently I don't have any calls in queue, so it'll say 0. But as I have calls in queue, I can have that needle that we're kind of seeing behind there will start counting up. So let's take a look at how to do this, and then we'll kind of look at that. So the longest call in queue, that's a duration. So I'll come here to duration, and I'm going to look for queue duration. Again, kind of like I said a minute ago, the great thing about this is the questions are actually really the same, or the parameters are really the same with one variation, and that's calculation. It's now duration instead of count. And this is where I typically change the calculation. So let's go ahead and do this first. I want to see how many calls or what the longest call in queue is right now. Or I could say since 8 a.m. or in the last however long. Right? I'll go ahead and say right now for fun. We'll go ahead and hit OK. Great. Now, like I said, I want to see the longest call in queue. If I leave this at duration, this basically takes every call that's in queue and it takes their total in queue and it combines it. So if I have one call in queue for 5 minutes and one in there for 4 minutes, my duration will say 9 minutes. Right? So it just combines the total. I don't want to do that. What I want to see is the max duration, the longest duration. I can also do minimum, average, or median. So we'll go ahead and say max duration. Again, if we want this to look at a specific group, we will. I'm not going to actually select any groups on this one. I'm just going to leave that blank. And then, of course, again, if I wanted to include any calls that had a queue event or a pending queue callback call, I can. We'll go ahead and hit OK, and then we're going to go ahead and change that name to max queue duration. And then hit apply, and there we go. So right now, we don't have any calls in queue, which is great, right? That's a good thing. But I really wish I did so that I can kind of show you what this is going to look like a little bit more. Okay, so there you have it. Okay. Now, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and resize this just a little bit there and move that up right there, and there we have it. Now, we'll probably start seeing some calls come in here into the queue. I'm actually going to go ahead and change this one a little bit just to give us a better chance. Let's go ahead and say all group. Actually, we'll just deselect everybody and then hit apply. There we go. So we have a call in queue right now, so you're starting to see that needle count up. Right now, I showed you guys this a little bit ago with Fam's question, and forgive me, Fam, if I'm saying your name incorrectly. I apologize. But at this point, I've got these calls in queue, and I want to be essentially kind of alerted if those thresholds are hit. Really, there's not much going on here, but we're going to come in here, and I'm going to set up a threshold for my gauge widget. Okay, so right here where it says thresholds, I'm going to go ahead and open this up, and let's go ahead and say our longer queue duration is around 2 minutes, and you may not be able to get it right on 2. I'm not very good at that. So here we go. We did pretty good today. So we have one call. I want to see, if it hits 1 minute in queue, it'll turn yellow. If it hits 2 minutes in queue, it turns red. Hit OK, and we can see that here. Right. So now we have 5 calls in queue. Our longest queue duration right now is 57, 58, 59 seconds. So it's going to now hit that yellow, and we can see that. As soon as that call leaves the queue, that needle will drop and go to the next longest call in queue. Okay, so that's kind of how that works. Okay, let's do one more widget, and then we'll move on. Let's do the leaderboard widget. This is a really popular widget, so I'd like to show you guys how to do this one. Really, it's no different than doing these 2 widgets right here. There are just some slight process differences. Okay, so we'll go ahead and click and drag, and we'll have that be something like that right there. So here's where it's a little bit different. On these widgets here, I was selecting one value. The difference here is I'm selecting multiple values. So to do this, the first thing I need to do is I need to decide what category of leaderboard I want this to be. This could be an agent leaderboard. It could also be, if I prefer, a group leaderboard. So looking at the different groups, I can have it do call directions, inbound, outbound, internal, and then there's account code. Account code, again, is for those of you that have the agent dashboards module. If you're not using agent dashboards, then you probably aren't using this. But account codes, that's sometimes referred to as disposition codes or release codes, things like that. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it with agent. We'll kind of stick with the most popular, and then we'll go to our values. This is plural, which this is where it's different. I'm not just selecting one. I'm going to select multiple. So as we add our values, we'll see them start building up in this list. Okay, so let's come in here and hit add. And once I hit add, now we're familiar with this window. We have our 4 folder options again. We're going to come in here and start with miscellaneous, and I'm going to use an option called agent state. Okay, agent state shows me what someone is currently doing. So if I wanted to, I don't have to call it agent state. I could just call it state if I want to. We'll just go do that, and we'll go ahead and say okay. Great. There's my first value. Now let's build our list. Let's go ahead and add another one. Let's do that exact same value, only over here now I'm going to make another change. And instead of calling this agent state, I'm going to call this time in state. And we're going to switch this to time in state. Time in state shows me how long someone has been performing that specific activity. So I'll give you a good example where this makes a lot of sense for people. If I have an agent that goes into do not disturb, right? If I have an agent hit that DND button on their phone, agent state will say DND. Time and state will show me how long. So if someone's only supposed to go on do not disturb for 15 minutes, maybe they're taking a 15-minute break, right? They take 15 minutes. If they go past that, it will show. I will be able to see that they've gone past that, right? That's what time and state will show me. Okay, so there you go. Great. Let's add a few more. I'm going to go ahead and add another one that gets pretty popular. I'm going to go ahead and let's do login count. We could do login count, or we could say ready count. In fact, maybe let's do ready count. Ready count will show me if someone is ready to take a call. Okay, or if I do login count, it shows me that someone's logged in. So there's a couple different ways we can do this. So I think I will stick with group login count. Okay, so if someone is logged into their group, what I can do is I'll leave time frame right now. Calculation, however, I'll switch that from count to true false. If they are logged in, it'll show a check mark. If they're not, it will not show the check mark. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say customer service. Let's see how many people are logged into customer service right now. Okay, so we can do that. We could also add ready count to show if they're ready to take a call. Okay, from there, let's do maybe one more. Let's do account, and let's do inbound calls answered. Right, so I'm going to change the name to that because I know it's being answered. I'll go ahead and select the name, and then from here, time frame. This time, however, for time frame, I'm not going to do right now. What I want to do instead is I'm going to do since, and I'm going to say, hey, since 8 a.m., or whatever time you want to put, how many calls have my agents answered? Great. And I might want to select those for a specific, let's say customer service again. Okay. And again, do I want those to be calls that had a specific queue event involved? All right. Okay. Let's actually do one more. Let's do missed calls. How many calls have they answered, and how many calls have been missed? Again, we'll go ahead and say since 8 a.m. Great. Once that's done, group/queue, customer service. I'll leave calculation at count. And then there's one last thing I like to mention here, and that's call direction. By default, call direction for missed calls only looks at inbound calls. Okay, but I have worked with clients that say, hey, I want to see a total of inbound and internal calls. So I could add internal to that if I want to. I'm not going to, but you could. Okay, great. Hit OK, and there we go. I guess we could do a duration if we wanted to as well. Let's add one more. Let's do inbound talking duration. And what I want to do for this one is I want to do average talking duration. Okay, time frame since 8 a.m. Beating a dead horse here. I get that just a little bit here. I understand, but I just want to show you how similar this is throughout each value. Calculation is where I want to change this one. We're going to change that to average duration. And then again, for which group, we're going to go ahead and say customer service. Okay, okay, and there we go. So there's my widget. There's the values that I want on that widget. I can go ahead and hit OK now. Now, the last thing I have to do here is because this is an agent leaderboard, it now wants to know which agents I want this to feature. I want this to feature all of my real-time agents. So I'll go ahead and say select all and then hit apply. And there we go. Okay, so there is my new widget. So I can see if they're logged in. I can see what they're currently doing. I can see how long they've been doing that, how many calls they've answered, missed, what their average talking duration is. If I want to know who the leader is for answered calls, I can click on that header. It shows me that Jared Baker has answered the most with 22. Okay, so that is how I create a leaderboard widget, and that's how I create a wallboard just in general. Okay, any questions there? Cool. Practice this. That's what I would recommend. Just practice this, right? Try to create wallboards.
Hey,
oh, yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
trying to do it a little bit while you're doing it on the Avaya type scenario. I'm not doing it exactly, but just looking at where you're going and back and forth. One thing I noticed is you've got the tabs down below where you got two groups. It looks like CC, and then the one you're on now is the Xima inbound, or is it Untitled?
It's Untitled. It's this last one.
Okay, like let's say I go in there and I'm like, I've got a perfect group of tabs down below and I screw up something on this one.
Mm-hmm.
How hard is it just to say, all right, get rid of it, other than discard it? Let's say I save it and then I come back an hour later and go, oh God, I screwed this one up. Let me just get rid of it.
Yeah. Yeah, so all you have to do at that point is just right-click on that tab and you can say remove.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wasn't used to the tabs below.
Sure.
Okay, good. Great.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and it's, super simple. So yeah, you can remove them, you can rename them, you can duplicate them. Maybe you really liked the base of the wallboard that you created, but you didn't necessarily, love a certain aspect of it, or so, I don't know. Or maybe you wanted to create another one, but for a separate group. Rather than creating the whole wallboard all over again, I could just say duplicate, and I can have that same wallboard, except now all I would have to do is come in here and change my group. Right, so maybe I don't want that to be the customer service group. Maybe I want it to be marketing. Right, so you can come in here, just duplicate that wallboard rather than having to create it from the ground up each time. Just duplicate it and then make those changes to each widget that you have on there. So
right.
yeah. So there's a couple things that you can do there for sure. Awesome. And it'll double check, right? Hey, are you sure you want to do this? You can't undo this. Yeah, I'm sure. So there you go. Awesome, great question. Any other questions? Okay, great. Well, guys, there's just a couple other things I want to show you really quickly with Realtime. One of them, there are two other things here: agent timeline, group timeline. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time with group timeline. I will mention really quickly agent timeline and kind of just what this is. What happens sometimes is we have clients that say, hey, the wallboard's great. I'm glad I can display it up in my office for everyone to see if I want to. But I want to know what my agents are doing. Right? I want to know what they're kind of doing. And this agent timeline is what I like to refer to as like a supervisor, right? Because I can have this up on my screen and I can have this here and I can go through and say, okay, well, what is everybody currently doing? So Ashley Scott, she's currently talking on a call with Corey Ferguson. I can see that she's logged into 2 out of her 3 groups. She's currently taking this call for marketing. All right, so I can see a lot just in these little profiles here. Now over here, we've got these colored bars. And these colored bars, if I hover over them, it actually will show me what this means. So this green bar here, if I hover over it, it says, okay, this is a talking event. It's been going on now for just over 2 minutes, again, for marketing and with that person, Corey Ferguson. But if I come back up here, if I scroll back here, or if I even click and drag back, I can actually see what they were doing earlier today. Right? So I can see here, Brian Freeman, he had a call come in. It was ringing. It rang for 23 seconds. He answered it. There was a talking event for 2 minutes and 7 seconds. It then went on hold, and he put this person on hold for 2 minutes and 53 seconds. He came back and picked that up again. They spoke for 2 minutes and 20 seconds, and then that call ended. Another call came in automatically. So anyway, you can start seeing what people are doing throughout the day. So you can click and drag back. You can actually also click on this little timeline bar up here. If I click on that, that actually gives me the ability. This one is fairly or semi-historical. So I can go through and say, okay, well, what were they doing at this time last week on the 31st? Right now, my demonstration version here won't actually show because it doesn't go back that far. But if this was live and I saw this, I would panic, right? Because I would say, okay, nobody was doing anything at that time. Okay, so hopefully you wouldn't see that. But it does allow you to see other days, the activity of those agents during those specific times. Okay. If I want to go back real time, I just hit this little play button here up here in the top right hand corner.
So really, sorry, but so really, basically, what is, when you talk about historic, this is not meant for looking at historic date.
Right.
It looks more like towards to real time, like just best work for like today.
Yes, correct. Yeah, and of course we've got the reports that can help you report on this historically, right? I could see every, and that's just there. I'm sure it was just a feature request by people several years ago. They said, hey, well, what were they doing at that time? That's really what, you probably won't really use that, but it is an option. If I wanted to see historically, I would personally rather run a report than use this, because all this will do is show me these bars of information, right? And so you're absolutely right. Historically, it can do historically, but this is more used for what's going on right now. For sure. Yeah. Now, the other thing I'll say here really quickly is obviously I've got this list of agents. They all have a picture in here. If I right click on here, by default, it'll have a silhouette. If I wanted to add someone's picture, I can click on the person. I can say change user image, right click on the person, say change user image. I can come in here, open this up, find the picture that I want to use, and then hit open. And then once I put that in place here, that'll actually populate throughout Chronicle or Vicall reporting. And you'll notice, if I come back to that wallboard that I've created, you'll notice next to their agent names, I see their pictures. Really where I use that, aside from this right here, is I see that in Cradle to Grave as well. So if you have not been on my Cradle to Grave training, Cradle to Grave is a style of report that's found under the report section, and it shows me the details for every call that took place during a selected time frame. And I will be able to see their picture next to all of the calls that they are associated with. Okay, so that makes it kind of nice. But, pictures are not necessary. It's just kind of like that aesthetic sugar on top type thing. Okay, so there you go. So that's agent timeline. Like I said, the main thing I wanted to point out here is what this is, what it does. And the other thing I will mention, I failed to mention this, you've got these little blue bars right here. These blue bars represent login times. If there's not one, so for example, like Brandon Carpenter, he's in help desk. He's currently not logged into the help desk help desk skill. And so if I hover over that, I would also be able to see how long he's been logged out. So help desk, he's been logged out for just about 3 hours and 15 minutes. Whereas for customer service, he's been logged in for around that same time. Same thing with marketing. So the blue bar indicates that they're logged in. No bar indicates that they're logged out. Then, in addition to that, you have, like, for example, this little DND button here. Now, if I go and put myself on Do Not Disturb, you would see that here, okay? And not only would you see that, let me go ahead and refresh that to see if that registers. It didn't. Maybe I didn't do the right person. No, I did the right person. Let's try Ashley Scott. Nope, it's just not registering for me. If someone puts themselves on Do Not Disturb, this button highlights and a red bar starts counting here so that we can see how long they've been in a state of Do Not Disturb. Okay, so like I said, this is the supervisor view. You as a supervisor or your supervisors will look at this to kind of just monitor the activity of your agents throughout the day. Okay. All right. There is group timeline as well. I'll just really quickly show you this and then we'll move on to the alerts and triggers. Group timeline is a similar concept. Really what the group timeline focuses on, though, is your queue, which personally I would rather see in this format, in these wallboards, okay, that I've created. I would rather see it this way. That's just because it's easier for me to see. However, as a supervisor, you can keep this up and it shows you a graphical view of your queue. So right now we're looking at the accounting department. They currently have one queue or one call in queue. Okay. In addition to that, I can see this down here. These two different colored peaks represent two separate things. The blue peak represents the longest call in queue at that point, and the purple peak represents the average queue duration. So right now, because there's only one call in queue, it's the same. Average queue and max queue are the same because there's only one call in queue. But if another call were to go into queue, you would see those peaks separate like we're seeing right here. Okay. And again, I can switch between my groups. If I wanted to look at customer service and see how they're performing, I can switch between that as well. And I can see who the agents are that are logged in. If there are calls in queue, I can see who is in, which calls are in queue, that kind of stuff. So I like this. It's good. I just would prefer using the wallboard. That's just me.
Question. From the agent real time, are you able to listen to those calls that are there?
Great question. If you are using what we call the Xima Vertex, Vertex is our recording solution. If you are using that, then yes, you can. So if calls are being recorded and it's using our Vertex, then yeah, you can come in here and you can say live listen to user. Otherwise, unfortunately, you can't. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Great. Any other questions? Okay, cool. Let's do this then. I'm going to jump over really quickly to our real-time alerts and triggers. Alerts and triggers with the real-time, we've kind of discussed this already, but this gives me the ability to receive an alert if a specific real-time threshold is hit. Usually that's something like calls in queue or queue duration or missed calls or abandoned calls, things like that, right? So if I want my agents to be alerted, hey, we just had our 45th call abandoned, like emergency, danger, Will Robinson. Right, you can come in here and create a trigger that will be sent to those agents. Now, keep in mind, I'll actually kind of show you in this view here because I can kind of show you a little bit better. kind of. If I use these real-time alerts and triggers, there's really three ways I can receive them. The first is a screen pop. It looks like this, right? So what would happen is if I'm, I'm an agent, I'm working, if we hit 15 calls in queue or 10 hold events or whatever it might, I did hold events in these pictures, but if I hit 10 calls in queue or something like this would pop up on my screen with a customized message. These messages that you see here are pretty basic. I just basically labeled what it is, but you can have it say whatever you want it to say, right? And we have kind of three different levels of alerts. We have normal, which is this one here. It's kind of gray. It doesn't flash or anything. It just pops up. There you have it. You have this one, which is warning, which flashes really slowly, and then you have emergency, which flashes quicker. Okay, so you can do three different levels for the same value. It's just sending at different times with different urgencies. Okay, so that's option number one. You can have it send as that desktop screen pop. I'll address something else with that in just a second here. The other thing you can do is you can actually have it send as an email and or a text message if you would prefer as well. Okay, which is great for managers, right? And here's why. If I want one of those screen pops, there's two things that have to happen. Number one, I have to have a real-time license assigned to me. Now, the reason I say that's kind of a bad thing for managers or supervisors is because typically supervisors and managers don't have those real-time licenses assigned to them. Now, you may, and if that's the case, then you're good. But typically those are reserved for your actual contact center agents or your real-time agents, right? So I have to have a real-time license assigned to me. And the second thing is I also have to make sure that I have this application here on my desktop called the Chronicall Agent Dashboard. Or again, if you're using a via call reporting, it'll be called a via call reporting agent dashboard. Okay, I have to be logged into that in order for me to receive that notification. If I'm not logged into that, I will not be able to receive these desktop screen pops. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, on the other side of that, I mentioned the emails and text messages. Those are the other two ways that you can receive those messages. Emails and text messages, I don't have to have a real-time license assigned to me. Yes, my company has to have purchased a real-time module, but I don't have to have a license assigned to me specifically to receive an email or a text message. The second thing with that is I also do not have to be logged into that Chronicall or a via agent dashboard application. Okay, so I can receive emails and text messages without being logged into that. Right, so this is great for your agents. Typically, you're going to want them to be the ones receiving those desktop screen pops. For you as the manager, typically emails and text messages are the way to go. But you, again, do that however you prefer. So to create that, all I have to do is come in here under real-time triggers where it says create new. I'll go ahead and open this up here. I'm going to go ahead and give this a name. Let's do this for queued calls. We're going to call this one our 5 queued call message, 5 queue. We're just going to call it 5 queue, just like that. Okay. Value, click to define. Honestly, you're building a widget. So I would just come under the count folder, find queued calls, and then go through and do what I've already done. I'll say right now, leave calculation at count, group/queue. Again, if I wanted this to look at a specific group, most likely I would. So I'm going to go ahead and say customer service and then hit OK. Again, if I have contact center and I want these two calls to include queue events or pending queue callback calls, I'll go ahead and adjust that. But for now, I'll just answer those first 3 questions and then hit OK. Okay. So it now knows what to look for. Now I need to tell it when it should send that message, and that's where trigger threshold comes in. So I can go ahead and say, okay, anytime that there are greater than or equal to 5 calls in queue, that's when it should send this message. Okay, so that's the first part of this. The second part now is how are they going to receive that message and who should that message go to? So for those desktop screen pops like we saw here, I would come here where it says desktop users, open this up, and then I would go through and select those agents that have that real-time license assigned to them. From there, I would then now come in here and create my personalized message. And that's one of the things I actually really like about this. I can have it say whatever I want it to say. Right? So I might come in here and say something like 5 calls in queue, jump in, help out. Jump in, help out. Right? Something like that. Okay. I can also adjust certain aspects of this. Maybe I want 5 calls in queue to be larger font, so I can go ahead and make it more like that. So that when it pops up, it's bigger and more prominent. Okay, so you can customize that message however you'd like. Once that's done, that's when I get to choose that alert level or that urgency level. So normal, warning, or emergency. This one I would probably just put it normal, and then I would hit OK, and then I would create another trigger for 10 calls in queue, have it send when there's 10 or more calls in queue, And then I would obviously adjust that message to say 10 calls in queue, seriously help out, right? Something like that. And then I would switch this to a warning. Okay, so you can create multiple, like I said, multiple values or multiple triggers for the same value, but it's setting at different times with different urgencies. I should say, maybe rephrase that. It's setting at different thresholds with different urgencies. Okay, so that is how I create those desktop screen pops. Now, what if I want to receive an email or a text message? Well, that's this bottom portion. Email addresses, I can come in here and put in the emails of the individuals that I would like to receive this email. Okay, so I'll put myself, if I want this to go to multiple people, I would just put a comma and then put in the next email. Okay, comma, put in the next email. You don't have to put a comma space, just put a comma. From there, what about text messages? Do I want a text message to be sent as well? If you do, this is actually really simple. Stay here in this email address line, and then just get onto Google and find out what your cell phone service provider's text message gateway is. Okay, so the text message gateway is what you're looking for. So for example, here in the States, I go through a company called Verizon. And I got onto Google and I said, hey, what's Verizon's text message gateway? And it tells me that it's my phone number followed by @vtext.com, just like that. And I would place that in here as well. Okay. Once I've got all that done, I can go ahead and put in my email subject, 5 calls in queue. And then I would put my email body, which would probably be the same thing as this desktop message here. Hey, can you jump in and help out? We've got 5 calls in queue, something like that. Okay, so that's how I create an alert and trigger for the real time, and you can create as many of those as you like as well. Any questions about this? Okay, awesome. Once I'm done with that, I would hit OK, and then I would hit save.
I do have a question.
Sure.
I'm sorry, I'm a little slow on the mute.
You're fine. You're fine. No worries.
Wait a minute, I just lost my thought here. Oh crap, what was I thinking? Okay, so you answered one of my questions about the text. That was a good one because I was a little concerned you didn't have the text. Crap, I just lost my thought. I'll get back with you before we end.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, no worries. No worries at all. Okay. All right. I just get talking really fast, and sometimes I just go too fast to give people chances, so I apologize about that. Okay, so with this point, what we have left now to talk about is we're going to talk about the agent dashboard. Okay, so with agent dashboards, really agent dashboards is kind of an extension to the real time, and what I mean by that is agent dashboards, number one, requires real time. Number two, a lot of the principles are really similar. We're actually kind of doing some of the same things. Now, before I get into this, I will mention, I mentioned this earlier today. If you don't have the Agent Dashboards module and you don't want to stick around for this portion of the training, then please don't feel obligated to do so. Obviously, you're welcome to. We're going to go through it regardless. But if you don't have it and you don't want to stick around, then I just like to tell people, because I feel like sometimes people sit through this, they're like, I don't have this. They don't want to sit through it. So if you don't want to, you don't have to. Okay. Now, what I personally like to do first is this. For those of you who are not contact center clients, those of you who are not using our contact center, the agent dashboards is going to be done or used in this agent dashboard application. Now I'm going to relaunch mine really quickly here to kind of show you what this looks like. Okay. The great thing about this is if by chance you do install this agent dashboard application on your user's desktop, this will actually automatically prompt them to log in. It'll actually automatically load when they log into their computer. That's built into the code of it. So it'll automatically pop up when they log into their computer. So it'll prompt them to log in. All they have to do is find their name in this list. Right now, this is kind of a mess because we do a lot of testing here. But if I didn't want to scroll through, I could honestly just start typing my name, and that would pull me up as well. Okay. Once I've got my username in there, I can then put in my password. My password just by default is my extension, 239. So I would type that in. Of course, that can be changed, right? So I type that in, then I hit OK. Now I'm logged in. Now we're going to see a couple things pop up on my screen here, and this is in regards to agent dashboards. This is one of the benefits of using agent dashboards is you can create widgets that will then display directly on the desktop of the user. Now I mentioned this. If you are a contact center client, you may be using this. You can if you'd prefer, but you might also instead be using what's called the contact center agent client. And like I said, I go through that a little bit on my Friday training, and that's a website. So, or that's a browser feature. So if you're using the contact center agent client, you're probably not going to see these. You're probably not going to use these. Okay, so keep that in mind. But if I am using the agent dashboard application on my desktop, you as the manager can create widgets that you can then assign to your users so that when they sign in, these pop up on their screens. Okay, and you get to choose what those values are. Your agents are not the ones building these. They're not the ones deciding what's here. You are going to decide what you want them to see. Okay, so I've got a couple here. Here's my issue with this, however. If I open up any browser or any other application, these always sit on top, which can be a little problematic. Now, I can do certain things like right-click on them and change the opacity. Right? You can do that if you want to. That's not really a solve-all, though. What I like to use is this one, and here's why. This widget here is what we call the dashboard widget because it's specific to the agent dashboards. It's also called the dashboard widget because I can actually, dock this to my screen. So now that it's docked, notice it pushes my application over here. And if I minimize this, you'll notice it pushes all my applications on my desktop over as well. Okay, so here's that widget. It's showing me the real-time values my manager wants me to see. I also can move it. Maybe I want it over here on the right-hand side. Maybe I want it across the top. Sorry, my applications just went to my other screen. Okay, so you can do that if you want, if you prefer. So your agents will have that option. They can have it be floating. They can like this right here. Which I don't necessarily love that because again, it kind of gets in the way. They can have it be single like it is by default, or they can dock it to their screen. Okay, I'm going to dock this to my screen because I'm going to talk about this a little bit more. But either way is fine. These are great if I have a separate monitor, like 2 monitors. I can keep it over here on my other monitor if I want to. But I typically will use this. Okay, so let's talk about how to build these. I'm going to put this down here for just a second because we're going to talk about both of these. So to do this, I'm going to come over here to the left-hand side, and I'm going to go ahead and say Agent Dashboard Configuration. And under here, we're going to see an option called Dashboard Values. Dashboard Values is where we go to build these widgets. Okay. So what we'll see is here on the left-hand side, we're going to see a list of those agents that have that license assigned to them. Across the bottom, we see 3 options: Add Agent Value, Add General Value, and Add Widget. Let's start with this one right here and say Add Widget. And what will happen is this is where we're going to build a widget that looks like this. Okay, so this window opens up. It's going to say, okay, well, what kind of widget do you want to create? Let's go ahead and just do the exact same widget. We'll say title value widget. And then it's going to give me 2 options down here. Do I want to do this as an agent widget or a general widget? Let's do an agent widget first, and I'll explain the difference once we finish it. Okay, so I'll go ahead and say agent widget, hit OK. Great. Now, here's what I want to do. You've done this before. Right? Or we've done this before. We've built a wallboard. When we built those wallboards, we created widgets. Same thing. Okay, so we're here where it says value, click to define. We'll open this up. What I want to do, I'm going to do this exact same widget. So we're going to do missed calls. So I'll just say missed calls right there. Then we'll go ahead and answer our questions. Time frame, since 8 a.m. Okay, we'll go ahead and say calculation. We'll leave that at count, group/queue. I want this to look at the customer service group. There we go, hit OK, and that's it. We can go ahead and hit OK again, and we're good. Hit apply, and it's done. So now I want to assign it. I want to make sure that these agents see that on their screen. There's a couple ways I can do that. I can just open it up by clicking on this little person image here. It shows me the list of those agents. What I personally like to do is I like to come over here and select Ashley Scott, the first agent, and then I hold the shift button down and select the last agent. There's a good chance, depending on how many agents you have and which groups they belong to, I might want to assign this same widget to all of them. Okay, but if not, you don't have to. You can, of course, kind of pick and choose who you would want to assign that to. Oops. Okay. Once I've done that, once I've selected those agents, I can just check that box, and it's now assigned to all 10 of them. Now, here's what happens. Once I hit OK, that's saved. Those agents log into their agent dashboard, and they're now going to see a desktop application that looks like this. And it shows them how many calls they've missed. This is an agent widget. We created this as an agent widget. And what that would be saying is this. Hey, Ashley, this is how many calls that you personally have missed for the customer service group. Hey, Brian, this is how many calls that you personally have missed for the customer service group. Agent widgets look at me as the agent. If I have it assigned to me and I log in, it's only going to be looking at my extension. Okay, I've created that for everybody. Yeah, all I had to do was create it once. But because I created it as an agent widget, it now knows that it's only going to display the information for the specific agent that's logged in. So if I'm Ashley Scott, it'll only show me my stuff. If I'm Brian Freeman, it'll only show me my totals. So that's what an agent does. An agent widget does. It shows the agent their specific totals. Now that second option was a general widget. General widget is what I like to refer to as the group widget. If I created this missed calls widget as a general widget, it would be saying, hey, Ashley, this is how many calls your group has missed. Okay, Brandon or Brian, this is how many calls your group has missed. And that number would be the same for both, for each person, because they're part of the same group. Okay, so agent widgets or agent values are agent specific, whereas general values or general widgets are group totals. It's going to show them the group collectively. Okay. Any questions about that? Okay. Let's talk about this one here. Now, this widget here is not going to be created under Add Widget. It's going to be created using these other two options. Okay. Let's go ahead and start with a general value. Now, we're actually not going to see the end result of this widget I'm creating, but just keep in mind it would look like this, except it would only have two values. We're going to create two values on it. So it would only have two, whereas this one has like 10 or 11. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and start with general value. I'm going to leave everybody selected here. I'm going to go ahead and say general value, and now it's the same process, except I'm not selecting the style of widget. Let's do a count on this one. Let's do something like, let's do inbound calls presented. I'm going to go ahead and change the name to illustrate my point. Group presented. Time frame since 8 a.m. Okay. Which group? We're going to have this look at the customer service group. Now, there is agent here. 9.5 times out of 10, I leave that blank. I don't use it. The reason I might use it is, let's say, for example, I have a group of agents. So let's say, for example, the customer service group has like 60 agents. And I want to assign this to agents to see how many calls have been presented for the customer service group, yes. But maybe I've taken those 60 agents and separated them into like 6 different teams. Each team has 10 users or 10 agents. So maybe I want them to see how many calls their customer have been presented for customer service, but only for their team. So right here where it says agent, I could open this up and select just a handful of agents. So it's saying, yeah, look at the customer service group, but only for these 3 agents. And then it combines the total presented calls for those 3 agents for that group. Okay, so I don't very frequently use that feature unless I have a lot of agents and I want to kind of separate it by team, something like that. Okay, I hope that doesn't confuse anybody. Any questions about that? Okay, so by default,
Okay.
oh yeah, go ahead.
One of them. You reminded me what I forgot.
Okay, cool, perfect.
The time frame was a little confusing to me on these. Let's say we're, the one you just had up, we had the time frame on there, and we wanted to say it's a 7/24. We want to look at maybe, I don't know, from 8, 3 different shifts, or is, when you said since 8, how do we break that down? What is the duration of since 8? I know it's from 8 o'clock, but 8 o'clock to what?
8 o'clock to 8 o'clock. So it's a 24-hour time frame, right?
Okay.
So 8 a.m. to 8 a.m. tomorrow, essentially.
I gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah, so it'll actually tell you right here. So since 8 a.m. represents the events that happened since 8 a.m. These values are set every day at 8. So yeah, it'll do a 24-hour time frame.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. So if you have shifts, what I would probably do in that sense is I would actually probably build 2 separate widgets. One showing like your AM shift, one showing your afternoon shift, one showing your after hour shift, something like that. So you that way you can say since 8 a.m. and then when those people log out, like it's they're going to log out at the end of their shift and they're not going to see that anymore. It'll just refresh for the next time they come in, if that makes sense.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So yeah. Does that help clarify that for you?
Yes, that makes perfect sense.
Okay. Perfect. Great. Okay, so now that I've got this metric built, I can go ahead and hit OK. And notice it's actually already assigned. And that's because I left everybody selected. If I leave everybody selected as I'm building these widgets, it'll automatically just assign it to the agents that I have selected here. Okay, so that's why I like to do it this way rather than using the little person image. You can do it either way. Like, it really doesn't matter, but whatever works best for you. Personally, when I'm building these, I'm assigning them to everybody. That's just me. And so, like, I will just select everybody, and then as I build it, it just automatically assigns to them once I finish the widget. Okay. Now, what would happen here now once I hit OK is these agents, when they log into that agent dashboard application, they're now going to see two widgets on their screen. One showing them how many calls they've personally missed, and this widget here would only have one value on it. It would be saying, hey, this is how many calls your group has been presented. Right? So they have two widgets now. Let's do one last thing here. Let's add an agent value. And that agent value is going to go on this widget as well. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and say add agent value. It's really the same process. This last one we did inbound calls presented. Let's do inbound calls answered. And we're going to change the name to this one as well to illustrate my point here. We're going to call this alone answered, which sounds really sad if it's not. Time frame. Let's go ahead and say again, since 8 a.m. Okay. Calculation will leave at count, group/queue. I want this to be for the customer service group, and that's it. I can now hit OK, and notice once again, it's already assigned because I've got everybody selected here. So now what happens is this. When those agents, once I hit OK, it's saved. Once those agents log into their desktop, they're still only going to have two widgets on there. One showing them how many calls they've missed personally, and then this one, but it would have two values on there now. One showing group presented and one showing alone answered. Group presented was created under general value. So that would be saying, hey, Ashley, this is how many calls your group has been presented. And then alone answered was created under agent value. And that would be saying, and out of those calls presented to your group, this is how many that you personally have answered. Okay, so general values are for group totals. Agent values are if I want them to see their individual totals. You can do both on the same widget. Okay, but that's the difference between those two. Okay, any additional questions about these items? Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and close these because there's two more things I just want to mention really quickly with agent dashboards. Okay, one of those is what we refer to as account codes. Now I'm going to go ahead and open up account codes here really quickly. I'm actually going to do something else here as well because we're not going to run a report, but I'm going to show you really where account codes comes into play. Now to do this, I'm going to come back down to my desktop here, and what happens now is this. When your agents are involved with a call, and you can decide which call direction you want these to be applied to. So you can do this for inbound, outbound, and internal, or just inbound, whatever you prefer. But right here, what happens is anytime that I make a call or receive a call, I can now have this little screen pop up on my screen. Now that will happen automatically. I'm just coming down here because I have this demo portion and I can show you. I do get asked occasionally, does the agent have to do this? No, I'm just showing you, this is my demo here so I can show you what these are going to look like, right? So when I get a call, when the agent gets a call, they're going to get a little screen pop that looks like this on their screen. It shows them who it is, shows them where they're calling from, what time, and if it's for a specific skill, it will show them what skill or group that call is for, right? Because that client, when they call in, they might choose to speak to the sales skill or to the support skill, whatever that might be. If I'm part of both of those, this will let me know which group that call is for. Okay, so I get this little screen pop. The generic aspect of this is just saying, hey, this is the generic information for this call. This is your caller ID information, essentially. But as the agent, there are two things I can do with this. Number one, less important, is I can right click on this and I can say notes, and I can add notes to this call. So I can say add note, this guy wants to speak to a manager. Okay. Once I, as the agent, add that note, what would happen then is you, as the manager, could then, in Chronicall or by call reporting, in cradle to grave, which is another portion of the reports, in cradle to grave, there's actually a notes section where I could see notes that were added. So if an agent adds a note to a call, I will see within cradle to grave that a note has been added. So there's a column here, at least in this Java version. There is in the HTML version as well. It just has to be added. But right here, there's this C2G note section. If I had actually added an actual note to this call, this is just a demo, so it won't actually add it. But here where it says C2G notes, I would see a little note indicator here. So I'm just going to do this to make it kind of show you what it would look like. Okay, so you would see that something had been added there. And you could click on that, and it would show you what had been added. Okay, so if you want your agents to do that, they can. Not everybody wants that. Some people do. Kind of just depends on you, but they can. If the agent needs to add a note, they can right click on that and add that note to that call. Okay, great. Now from there, here's the more important aspect of this: the account code. Account codes are up to you. You don't have to use these. I do work with a lot of clients that don't use these, but some people do. Really what this is for is it helps me keep track, essentially, of why people are calling. Now, I'll give you another example of this. I worked with a client a little over 2 years ago, and the client, they did a lot of advertising. So through Facebook, Instagram, billboards, TV, radio, they did a lot of advertising, and they wanted to know how their money was being spent. They wanted to know where it was most effective for them to do their advertising. So anytime a client called in, the agent would ask, hey, how did you hear about us? And the person would say, oh, I heard a radio ad, or I heard Facebook, or I saw something on Facebook, right? Then these account codes were created to reflect those avenues. And when the agent took that call, they could then put in here what that account code was. So we're going to go ahead and say end user training. That's one that I've assigned to myself here just for these training sessions here. Okay, so end user training. The agent, now that they add that code, that call is associated with that account code, and that allows you again to do two things. One of those is here in Cradle to Grave, you can actually search for calls by those account codes, okay? Or you can run reports on those account codes. In fact, we have a few reports that allow you to report on those individual account codes. So if I click on account code here, we can see there's a couple of them. Okay, so I can keep track of why people are calling, or I can keep track of how many people are calling in about XYZ reason, right? So it'll show me how many calls were total, inbound, outbound, as well as things like talking durations, average talking durations, average call durations, that kind of stuff. Okay, so account codes, again, like I said, allow you to keep track essentially of why people are calling. So if I wanted to add account codes in this add account code section, all I have to do is come in here and say add account code. And I can type in whatever that might be. Training. Okay, someone called because they wanted training. Add account code. Why else might they call? Because they wanted to schedule an appointment. Okay. Appointment. Why else might they want to call? Maybe because they don't want to be called anymore. Do not call. Right? So I can go ahead and add whatever account code I want. And then from there, all I have to do again is select my agents. And then the nice thing about the account codes one is you might add a whole bunch of account codes. So rather than selecting each one individually, I can actually just go ahead and say select all. And that automatically selects all of them for everybody that I've selected here. Okay. Now, the other option that you have, and I'm going to go ahead and delete these so that I don't have any repeats. The other option you have is you can bulk add. Bulk add basically just means I might take like a notepad text file and do that same thing. I'll come in here and on one line at a time, I'll go ahead and say, do not call. Training, support, scheduled, right? Something like that. So you can go through and create an entire list. And then once you've done that, you can save that and then come here where it says bulk add. And you can find out wherever it is that you've saved that. Account codes right there. I can go ahead and say open and it automatically populates all of them. And because I had everybody selected, it automatically assigns that to everybody as well. So now, as those agents start taking calls, if that call is associated with the account code, they can start adding those account codes to those calls. And the other nice thing about that is they can actually add sub-account codes. Maybe I want people to know, or my manager to know, that this call was for end user training for Avaya. So you can actually add sub-account codes as well. If I enter the wrong one, you notice the strike through there, I can just delete it. Okay, but at that point, that's how I would use those account codes. Okay, questions about account codes? Okay, great. One last thing, and then we'll be done. And that is what we refer to as reason codes. Now, reason codes, there are actually several levels of them, and this is dependent on you. Some people use all of them, some people use one of them, some people don't use them at all. But what this allows me to do is it allows me to keep track, essentially, of why my agents are doing what they're doing. So, for example, if I go on Do Not Disturb, sorry, let me do that one more time. Okay, if I go on Do Not Disturb, okay, what would happen is when I hit that D&D button on my phone, or if I'm using the contact center agent client and I hit the Not Ready or the Do Not Disturb button there, this list of reasons will pop up. And these are customized, right? This is a customized list. So this is one that we have and that we use here. So if I go on Do Not Disturb, it's going to ask me why. Hey, why are you going on Do Not Disturb? Well, because I'm going to go to the bathroom. Because everybody loves it when people know that you're in the bathroom. So your agents will be required to select why they're doing something. Why would I do that? Well, there's a couple reasons why. Number one, because I want to keep track of why someone's doing what they're doing, right? We actually have reports that will allow me to see, how many times someone went on Do Not Disturb for the bathroom. We actually had a client last year who had an agent that was spending a lot of time on Do Not Disturb, and they didn't know why. And really what it came down to is they were just call dodging. They didn't want to take any calls. But what we did is we helped them establish those reason codes for Do Not Disturb. And once the agent was being told that they had to select a reason as to why they were going off on Do Not Disturb, that Do Not Disturb duration went down significantly because they were then being held accountable. Now that's just one reason. Another reason might be is because you also have access to what we call the presence list. This is me right here. I'm currently on Do Not Disturb. But let's take, for example, let's see if I can, that might have been one. Let me try. Yeah. So we have someone on our support team who's really not ready right now. They're on Do Not Disturb because they're working a support ticket, right? So we can keep track of why people are doing certain things that they're doing. Now, here's what happens when they don't add it. I can see that Cameron's on Do Not Disturb, he's not ready, but he's not saying why, right? So that's an indication for you as the manager to be like, hey, why aren't you doing this, right? So Do Not Disturb, it can be for Do Not Disturb, it can be for group logout, and it can be for extension logout, right? So you can do that essentially for any one of those. So I've already shown you the Do Not Disturb, but you can, again, like I said, if I want to log out of my group, it's going to ask me why. Hey, why are you logging out? Oh, because I'm going to a meeting. Right? Or if you're logging out of your extension for the end of the day, it'll ask you, why are you logging out of your extension? You can say why. Okay. So that's the purpose behind that. To set those up, I'm just going to show you one, and that's busy codes. Busy codes represents Do Not Disturb. We call it busy because not everybody calls it Do Not Disturb. Some phone systems, some people call it release, some people call it aux codes, some people call it not ready. If you are using our contact center, I would recommend using multimedia busy codes, not these busy codes. Okay, because your agents are going to put themselves on Do Not Disturb through their contact center agent client and not through their phone. They can do both, but you can set up lists for both. I guess you could do that, but let's talk about busy codes today, though. All I have to do is come in here and say add reason code, bathroom, right? All right, everybody loves it knowing that when you're in the bathroom, so we can add that reason code, then we can hit add reason code again, lunch, team meeting. Okay, so we can go through and add as many as we want. From there, same rule. Just select everybody and apply those. And then once we hit OK, anytime that those agents now hit Do Not Disturb, it'll ask them why they're doing that, and they'll be required to select why. Okay, so those are reason codes. Now, same rule applies for group logout codes, extension logout codes. It's the same process, right? There's a couple of them there, but I can go ahead and hit add reason code, and maybe they're going out because they're doing a team meeting. There we go. So you just add those reasons, and again, just assign those to those agents. And now that's assigned. Okay, any questions on reason codes? Okay, any questions about anything else we've discussed today?
On those pop-up, I guess the dashboard pop-up to show the caller ID, you said those are designed by default, right? They pop up and somebody calls in, right?
Yeah, they should be there, in particular inbound, but you do have the ability to decide which ones you want to pop up. So right here where it says pop-ups, you can select which ones you want to have popped up. So whether that be for an outbound call, inbound call, default, they should be there, but if they're not, you can come in here and make sure that they're both selected in particular.
Okay, looks like mine is broken.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and you can talk to our support staff about that. We can get into, I was going to say what version you're on, but yeah, like for time's sake here, I would just recommend talking to our support staff if needs be on that.
Okay.
So, okay. Great. Other questions?
Yeah, hey, it's Randall. Just where do you want us to put, I definitely like to have this recording just so I can go back in slow-mo.
Sure. Yeah, I get that.
No, not because of you, because I'm doing it on mine, watching you doing it on mine. Where do you want us to put that on the chat?
Yeah, you can just put your email in that chat, just so I make sure that I have the correct email. And what I'll do is once we finish this up, I do have to convert it, which can take anywhere between 10 minutes to a couple hours, just depends on how long.
That's fine.
But yeah, if you put your email there, I will send it over to you. I'm going to send it through a program called WeTransfer. And that just allows me to send large files through the email, right? And that allows you to download that video. The one drawback to it is if you don't download the video after 7 days, that link turns off, and so you won't be able to access after that. But yeah, that's how I'll send that over to you.
All right, so I'm just going to send me the recording, give you my email, and you're good to go with that.
Yeah, you can even just put your email. If I see your email in there, that just indicates to me that you want the copy of the recording.
Great class, by the way.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I hope it was helpful. So awesome. If there are no further questions, everybody, thank you so much for your time and have yourselves a fantastic afternoon.